Thank you everyone for coming. You're watching the Anthony Chan Zero. Coming up next is a review on the Nightfox Prowl, an unusually accessible night vision device. I'll talk about the exterior of the device and its included mounting. I'll also go through all of the menu settings and IR modes. More importantly, I'll touch on why the 360p display, opposed to 1080p, allows for more consistent use compared to other digital night vision options. Then I'll end up with my thoughts and what I hope Nightfox can do in future products. Hello. This is a review of the Nightfox Prowl Digital Night Vision Monocular. This item has been generating a lot of interest recently, so I figured now is a good time as any to give you my thoughts on it. Let's start with the basics. This is a device that is 4.6 by 2.7 by 2.6 inches, which is this size in comparison to the Baofeng UV5R. And now, with an average size banana of the cultivar most common in the southeastern US grocery store. In the box, it comes with everything you need to use it, including a 18650 battery, a GoPro strap style head mount, a GoPro interface for the device, a dovetail adapter for G24 NVG interface, we'll get back on this, 2 thumb screws to use as fastener hardware, and a USB-C to USB cable to connect to your computer. There is also a 32GB micro SD card, which I've replaced with a SanDisk 256GB one, and an EVA foam lined soft case that holds all the items. The SD card slot and USB-C port area is only protected by this friction slip cover, which has no positive securing mechanism. The 18650 battery compartment is slightly better protected, but the fitment here isn't exactly watertight, seemingly assuming that gravity will draw any water to drip off the edges rather than cling to the bottom. My suggestion is to apply electrical tape to these covers and then remove it when you need to access these areas. The 18650 compartment requires a size 0 Phillips head screwdriver, so you won't be accessing the battery quickly anyway. A neat feature of the mounting rail is that it is perfectly reversible, so if you are left-eye dominant, you can simply install the rail backwards and it will present to the right side. They also sell a dual unit bridge mount, which extends this bar to add a second unit. Unlike other companies, this mount is available for only $16 on the Nightfox website. Before we move on to the operation of this device, there's something you need to know. At the time of this recording, all Nightfox Prowl units are of batch 0723. Which means you need to install a hotfix patch. You can do this simply by clicking on the link in the description. At the very bottom of the main text body, there will be a link to the file you need and video instruction tutorial on how to install the file. Basically, you download the patch file, connect the Prowl while it is turned off, move the file to the Prowl's SD card, ensuring that there are no other files, and then you disconnect the Prowl and simply hold down the power and record buttons at the same time until the screen turns red. It will flash increasingly fast until this is complete. Once you have done this, your device can now output at 60 FPS instead of being locked to 30 FPS. We'll revisit that aspect later. Now that we've ensured the Prowl has the hotfix applied, the rest of its operation is generally straightforward. You can set the date and time of the device, toggle the device icon HUD on or off, etc. There are 3 main aspects of the menus I want to highlight though. The first menu aspect I want to highlight is that as you toggle the IR mode up, the first setting is called IR0. This is the passive night vision mode, where it does not turn on any of its onboard illumination. The other modes are then IR1, 2, 3, which use the 940 nanometer LED, and the IR4 to 5 modes, which use the 850 nanometer LED. Knowing what each of these does, and more importantly, which LEDs they turn on or off, can be important depending on how you use the device. There is also a menu selection that limits the IR settings to just one of the two illuminators, or disables them, which is useful if you want to use external illumination, or if you are operating the device in an environment where you want to prevent you, or someone borrowing a Prowl, from accidentally emitting IR light and giving away your team's position, such as airsoft. The second menu aspect I want to highlight is the frame rate. Nightfox's own literature suggests that the frame rate does not change the frame rate of the screen, only the frame rate of the recording. But depending on the brightness of your area, you can see that the frame rate of the screen itself is improved when you select 60 FPS. It would not make sense for the device to display 60 FPS on the screen while being unable to record 60 FPS as a file. So for our purposes, I would say that applying the hotfix is nearly mandatory. The third aspect I want to highlight is the brightness. While this seems like a straightforward selection, because this is viewing objects of potentially high contrast between well-lit and darker areas, the brightness level can make details physically more apparent compared to being on a lower setting. But set it too high at night and it could be distracting. Depending on your area, you may have to adjust this for the best results, so be aware of this menu option and use it as needed. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Yes, this display is only 360p, even though the sensor itself is 1080p. But before you get your keyboards clacking away, we first need to talk about the nature of digital night vision. In a traditional image intensifier night vision, light enters a tube that has a special lining with a layer of stuff that gets really excited by light. When light strikes that stuff, it converts electricity into more light. This is why it seems so much brighter to look through that type of night vision. It is physically multiplying the amount of light. In digital night vision, the light is absorbed by a sensor, which then turns it into an electrical signal that has to be processed, and then have the processed data sent to a display, a camera. This means that not only the digital signal is more prone to signal noise, but the signal is based on the actual ambient light available to the sensor, which can be very low and often near the edge of the sensor's ability to detect it. It also means that the display that we look at has to balance frame rate and resolution. Frame rate is very important for displays close to your eye, like in VR headsets. Resolution determines how much data the device needs to put onto the display screen. Frame rate, which is the number of frames displayed on a screen per second, can also be described as images per second. So you can imagine the sensor trying to take, say, 30 pictures per second in extremely low light. If you step this up to 60 FPS, you now need twice as much data to have 1 second of display. This also means that you have half the time to gather the data. On top of this, resolution itself requires a ton of data to fill in all those pixels. So when a digital night vision device is viewing low light at a resolution and frame rate that it cannot get enough data for, it can do one of two things. It can fill the image anyway with signal noise, which I'm sure you've seen from videos when units like the Psionics Aurora have insufficient light but still have to push 720p video. Or the second thing it can do is drop the frame rate. The NVG-10 unit, which is the Prowl's immediate competitor, does both. This is why the image can often appear very grainy and also seem disorienting. The NVG-10's maximum FPS in ideal conditions is still just 30 FPS, and this drops down to 7.5 FPS. The upshot of all of this is when it comes to the Prowl is that it sacrifices display resolution for image and frame rate consistency. When you set it to 60 FPS, its new minimum frame rate is now 30 FPS, meaning that even in low light conditions, you will still have a semi-usable frame rate for navigation. The reason why this is possible is because of the sensor to display resolution ratio. The sensor is 1080p, meaning that its 360p display has up to 3 times the data it needs to resolve a usable image. This also means that it's receiving essentially 3 times more data per image, which makes it able to function at the frame rates required to be comfortable for viewing when the NVG-10 cannot. In this comparison footage, the Prowl is capable of performing nearly as well as the Aurora in conditions where standard cameras start to darken, and in low light conditions until the ambient illumination falls to near arm's length darkness, where it becomes hard to see objects held at arm's length. It performs comparably. This shift in how digital night vision is constructed is huge for the budget market. No other device has its priorities straight on this, and this is why I think this company will be doing some great things in the future. Speaking of comparison footage, I must apologize for confusion caused by a previous video. In a previous video, I intentionally altered the footage with a green color filter and swapped the clips around so that only people who had prior experience with either the Prowl or the PVS-14 can identify which was which. However, as you can see, no other changes were made to the footage. This speaks to the strength of the Prowl in an urban or suburban setting. In this next segment, on the bottom of my Nightfox Prowl, you may see this little particular modification. It's actually really easy. This is a Manfrotto quick release plate. I believe it's Manfrotto RC2, the other RC2, or Manfrotto 323. This is the polymer version. What I like to do, because I work with tripods, is I put this quick release plate and I just tie it in on the bottom of the Nightfox Prowl. What this allows me to do is it allows me to use this not Manfrotto copycat clone quick release adapter, so I can just stick it onto the tripod. So traditionally in the old days when I had a camera, I would put it on the tripod and I would screw like this and this and this and this and this. Now if I want to attach the Nightfox to a tripod, I just line it up, drop, lock, and secure. The Nightfox Prowl or any other camera is ready to go. Hard to see, but there is a safety system here which prevents the locking system from opening. Although for this particular copycat plate, it looks like the locking system doesn't work, so maybe don't rely on it. But anyways, this is a copycat plate. The real ones are too expensive for my budget. But anyways, for quick demonstrations such as this, it certainly locks the camera in place and is ready to go. So if you see something like this, that's just the little optional modification I put on. It doesn't affect the use of the camera in any other way. Now, let's go ahead and switch on to the Headstrap demonstration. Moving on to the actual wearing experience, I would say that the included Headstrap is acceptable. Unlike standard GoPro Headstrap mounts, which have a bare plastic backplate and no rear pad, this actually comes with an included backplate and a Fox leather pad for the rear. This is something that they didn't have to do, but they did anyway to improve the experience for the user. While I will still say that it can be uncomfortable to use for periods longer than 30 minutes at a time, this is because the Headstrap lacks a counterbalance, and the 1 pound Prowl starts to strain on your neck and head. For me, and my given forehead, after an hour of wearing, the uneven foam pad started creating some pressure points on the top due to the weight distribution. I can imagine someone wanting to take this off after 90 minutes. because that person was me. I took it off after 90 minutes. The only additions they need to do to fix this is to add 2 rows of loop Velcro covered PALS webbing to the pad and add slightly more padding to the backplate. This will allow you to attach a pouch using MOLLE or Velcro that you can put a pack of batteries into, which will counterbalance the weight of the Prowl. You can avoid this issue entirely by using the included dovetail on a G24 compatible helmet, where you can mount counterweights, use helmet suspension systems, and otherwise mitigate the weight in well-documented ways. Options for NVG harnesses that allow better NVG mounting without an entire full-sized helmet exist as well. The mounting hardware for the Prowl in either configuration is adjustable for both the distance between your eyes and the depth that you want the device to be mounted. The dual bridge mount also allows you to do this, but when you mount the 2 units together, the combined width prevents you from getting them close together. While it was usable for me, I found the units were just a little too far apart, and it created a slight double vision effect that was somewhat distracting. For me personally, I feel that placing this on your non-dominant eye is the way to use it. When you put it over your dominant eye, the issue you run into is that the latency is a lot more noticeable in front of your primary eye. By leaving your dominant eye with natural night vision, your brain can more smoothly switch between using the night vision when there is insufficient light, and then using your normal eye when there is sufficient light. The fact that they included a G24 dovetail adapter is great. This is something they really did not have to do, because there are GoPro adapters for NVG shrouds on helmets. But they did it anyway, again, for the benefit of the user. This comes with the Prowl at no charge, and that's an incredible quality of life enhancement, even if it is made of plastic. The dovetail adapter can go right where the GoPro adapter normally goes, and everything else stays the same. Due to the way they designed the Prowl mounting rail, you can still fiddle with the left or right eye width, and you then use the G24's own adjustment for depth. A relevant question is, how would it work with airsoft at night? Here you see the Prowl on a tripod looking at an otherwise dark scene. If all you had were your eyes, you would have a hard time seeing anything. When using the Prowl for the first time, out of the box, the focus may not be set properly, but this is easily fixed by using your offhand to simply rotate the focus ring until the item you want to look at is in focus, like any other camera. I use the 3x zoom function to make it easier to dial in the focus. Using the Nightfox Prowl extends your ability to spot shapes and details. And now, here's an airsoft gun. While the scene is moderately dark and risky for airsoft, the Prowl, even when its focus ring is set to infinity, is capable of seeing both iron sights and red dot, allowing you more airsoft combat capability. On platforms like airsoft rifles, where normally your eyes might be a few inches from the scope, the Prowl might collide with your existing optic. You may have to make adjustments like raising the optic or moving it further out. If you were to use the Prowl's built-in IR illuminator, the light would bounce off your airsoft due to the position of the illuminator. So I would use the built-in IR for tasks that do not require you to look through another optic, such as camping, hiking, night fishing, or other standalone tasks. Again, as previously stated, if you want to go from an outdoor environment to a closer environment, you can easily adjust the focus. The Nightfox Prowl remains capable of displaying your airsoft. Notice how after adjusting the focus, the Nightfox Prowl is even capable of reading text using the moonlight only. This could be ideal if you want to read a book. preferably while camping and not during an airsoft game. The ability to see both far away and your sights at the same time is something we might take for granted. If you're new to night vision, such as myself, you may not know that not every night vision device has that capability of seeing both easily. For example, this is a Steel Industries PVS-14 with an Elbit Gen 3 white phosphor image intensifier that has an FOM of over 2100. The PVS-14 can also adjust focus from infinity to close. However, what it cannot do is see both near and far at the same time without giving up something. PVS-14 users have historically had to deal with either greatly reduced light sensitivity at an aperture setting capable of focusing on both distances, or just not being able to see things 10 to 13 feet in front of them. There's a lot of optics and photography experts who can do this particular lesson better than I can, but the reason for this is because the PVS-14 has a really big lens setting. In order for us to see things in focus, the light that bounces off the object has to be in a neat line from the object to our eyes. The bigger the lens setting, the more random light it receives, creating a blur caused by the off-axis light it receives. If we make the lens setting, known as the aperture, smaller, it receives less random light rays, making the image sharper. But by making the lens setting smaller, less total light comes into the device. What this means is that for most PVS-14 users, when set for far focus, there's a notable distance in front of you where everyone is blurry. It's not because you suck at taking pictures from your phone through a PVS-14. The PVS-14 itself is incapable of seeing things clearly within a certain distance. Understandably, this is hard to visualize for me just talking about it, so let me show you what I mean. I mounted the PVS-14 to the Sony AX53 camcorder, so now you can see what it's like to look through a PVS-14. If you look to your right at first glance, you'll notice the scene looks great. While it's not quite as wide as the Prowl's 51 degree FOV, 40 degrees is pretty standard for these types of devices. To be fair to the PVS-14, we will zoom in a bit for the benefit of the viewer. As you can see, when the focus ring has its distance set to far, you should have no trouble seeing the scene, as long as everything stays far. If we come back to me, what you will notice is, as I get closer, I get blurrier. The reason for this is what I told you downstairs, is that the PVS-14 has a large aperture that lets in more light for a brighter view, at the cost of letting in off-axis light rays. On this specific device, with the housing and lens it came with, when set to infinity, this PVS-14's minimum arming distance was measured to be about 22 feet. A reasonable question is, what if you just adjust the focus closer so that you can see closer? Let's do that. The PVS's focus is now set for as close as possible. I stand here in front of you at 5 feet. You gained some close range, but if you remembered, you lost something else. Take a look at the same view to your right. It's probably not fun to look at. When it comes to the specific distance of blurriness, this can vary. Some units can see within 10 feet, others may be as bad as 20 feet. The end result is all PVS-14 units have trouble within 10 feet if set to a standard far focus. And this affects your airsoft as well. Just take a look at this. Which is the better night vision device? I will let you be the judge. There are still a few caveats. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. Firstly, because the screen is 360p, this still limits the distance at which you can appropriately identify a target. This is okay because for most people, we're playing airsoft under 50 yards, usually indoors or in our homes, out to perhaps the other side of the street. So this is acceptable. The second problem is baked into the nature of this $250 device. Even at 60 FPS, there is still motion blur and lag. Like in video games, it's almost on the edge of smooth motion, but it does still have some lag. This is especially noticeable at the lower 30 FPS base setting, or when it drops to 30 FPS in the low light mode. The only way to mitigate this is to introduce more light by using a visible or IR light, or by using it when there is more ambient light. The third major complication is that if you intend on using this with an optic, you cannot use the built-in illuminator, as the IR light will splash off the glass and cause a glare. You can avoid this by buying a $10 to $50 IR flashlight and then buying a 1-inch ring to mount it to your airsoft gun, or by selecting one of several dedicated purpose options such as Hog IR light or even an LAM, which work with this device. But it does add some cost to the system. Keep that in mind when weighing if this is the right purchase for you. Nightfox did in fact anticipate this, which is why they allow you to disable both built-in LEDs entirely via that menu function that I mentioned earlier. This is yet another way that Nightfox has made changes easier for the end user, even in this inexpensive device. We now arrive at the possible improvements part of the video. This part will be a bit technical and not relevant to the device as is, so if you don't want to watch this part, skip to the timestamp in the description. The number one recommendation I have is for Nightfox to utilize the StarViz 2 sensor. This is a brand new sensor that only launched last year, and there has already been a company that uses the same sensor family. However, unlike Nightfox, they focus on using a high-end display and expensive components to reach that display resolution. Nightfox's advantage here would be filling out the entry-level market, so that we have a device that has the same capability, but simply uses a 720p or 1080p screen to allow for 75 FPS. This could even be as high as 90 FPS if they choose to use a 2K or 4K StarViz 2 sensor. This would allow Nightfox to compete with a $500 to $700 device. If this has to be done using a Prowl 2 Pro or a Pro Owl, then I believe this market would still be interested in this device. The device's Prowl 2 could then use a standard 2K sensor with a 720p screen, and this change would only increase the cost of the device by perhaps $100, where it would compete favorably to the NVG-10. The second recommendation is to improve the sealing of the device. The Prowl only has a simple friction slip cover for the SD card slot and USB-C port, and it's clear that this area was not waterproofed. The slipcover also has a fairly loose seal by nature. By more securely sealing the SD card / reset button area and making the USB-C port a separate waterproof port, this also makes using an external power bank more viable. The third recommendation is to reduce the number of illuminators to only the 940 nanometer LED. This is enough to be suitable for document reading and basic navigation. With 2 LEDs, the Prowl is much wider than it has to be, and it is impossible to design it with a sealed battery tube compartment. By limiting this to only 940 nanometer, the Prowl can be made more suitable for airsoft due to the narrower width for dual mounting, and the 18650 battery compartment can be made into a tube with a screw-on gasketed cap, which happens to also allow for much faster battery changes in the field and contributes to an overall more waterproof design. The fourth recommendation, as I previously stated, is to add PALS webbing or MOLLE webbing to the rear of the head strap. This will add a negligible cost to the head strap, but drastically improve its wearability, and by selecting MOLLE, any pouch of a compatible size can be used, limited only by the end user's budget and desires. These changes will already make the Prowl a much better device. In fact, the direct sequel to the NVG-10, the NVG-30, has incorporated these features and is positioned completely to replace the NVG-10, meaning that these changes are even more important for Nightfox to remain competitive in this space. However, I do want to get into some further speculation, which will all sound crazy, but is something that is actually possible. Nightfox has stated in public comments they are interested in exploring a budget-oriented thermal monocular. My crazy recommendation here is to make the monocular small enough to ride onto a side mount that attaches to the bottom tripod socket. Nightfox themselves have already made devices that fit onto the tripod socket, such as their IR torch mount that goes onto their binocular units. If they made it so that the thermal unit could side saddle the Prowl with a streamlined single illuminator design, they could then make it so that the thermal unit plugs into the Prowl and provides a thermal fusion overlay, using the hotspots as the outline projected over the Prowl image. Combined with the StarViz 2 sensor, this would make it unironically the cheapest thermal fusion monocular on the market, and it could do this for perhaps $900 to $1,100 all in. $500, $700 for the Prowl, $200, $300 for the thermal unit. The thermal resolution is most likely going to be 128 pixel, which would have limited range, but given that night vision itself is generally limited to 200 meters max anyway, this is not a limitation. If they manage to fit a 256 pixel thermal unit, even better. But this is just my opinion on where it should go. If you agree, be sure not to like and comment on this video, because you should email Nightfox instead and tell them you want this capability. Apart from that, one improvement I hope the next Nightfox Prowl update has is a way to consistently turn on the device to a lower brightness. So let me give you an example. Just for my personal taste, when I power on the device at night, I find that the default brightness level 2 is too much, so I have to cycle it all the way to 5 and back to 1 for a more optimal view. I would guess the reason they did this was to help those with different eyes see the screen during daytime. But I would guess most of the people turning on the device would use it to see at night, and maybe 2 is too distracting for nighttime use. What I would like is an option for default brightness, and it would let us change the brightness level when the device powers on. So if you only use this during the day and have trouble seeing the dark screen, you can tell it to default brightness 5 each time you power on. And if you're like me and generally only power the view in low light or night, you can have it default to 1. Of course, if you need to adjust the brightness afterward, you still can. Another user interface improvement could be to allow users to create a custom color filter using a hex code input menu. This would be chunky using the buttons available, as you would have to click up and down through the entire alphanumeric letter number combination for each digit. But I think we, as the end user, can deal with this to have vision that is suited for our preferences. For example, someone who is colorblind may prefer a different color set than green, or someone may have an easier time seeing contrasts in a different color palette. Both of these can be implemented using the same firmware update process used to update to 60 FPS. So these can be done using the device as is. That being said, my final thoughts on this device are very positive. There's a lot to like about this thing, and while some will get hung up on the 360p screen resolution, I think these people are missing the bigger picture of what 360p gets you, namely frame rate, on a device that is in front of your face. There are minor of quality life aspects I would like to see improved, but many of these can be mitigated by the user. If you are considering this device, then I'd recommend it. For $250, there is just no competition, especially given that all of the big and small ways Nightfox has made this a user experience centered device. I can also see Nightfox competing with the formidable specs that the NVG30 offers, with the changes I mentioned earlier. Thank you for watching.